Picture the edge of the world, not a metaphor. The actual edge, the place where every map you've ever seen simply stops, where the cartographers gave up and drew sea monsters because they had nothing else to draw. Now fill it with ice. Add wind that can lift a grown man off a deck, water so cold it kills in minutes, penguins that scream like drowning children in the dark, and a coastline of black rock that has never once, in the entire history of the human species, been seen by anyone who could write it down. That's the bottom of South America in the year 1520, 52 degrees south, a place so far from everything you know that letters home are not late, they're impossible. A place where you could see God's untouched creation in the morning and eat rat for dinner by evening, and be grateful for the rat. We're going back there tonight. Not as historians tracing lines on a chart, we're living it. One voyage, one boy. Everything he would have seen, smelled, heard, and survived. And the things he almost didn't. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I still have no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just quietly fascinated by frozen sailors chewing leather off the yardarms. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. The rope is frozen to your hands, not stuck, frozen. The wet hemp went stiff an hour ago, somewhere in the middle of the dog watch, and now the ice on the line has fused with the cracked skin of your palms. And when the boatswain screams at you to haul, you haul, and you feel the skin tear, and you keep hauling anyway, because the alternative to hauling is the ship going onto the rocks, and the alternative to the ship is nothing. There is no alternative to the ship. The ship is the entire world. Your name is Martin de Ayamonte's shadow. That's what the older men call you, because you follow the real Martin around like a dog. But your actual name is Juan. Juan de Zubileta. You're 17 years old, you're from Baracaldo, in the green Basque country of northern Spain, and you are currently 480 days sail from your mother's kitchen, standing on the deck of a ship called the Victoria, in a channel of black water that no European has ever entered, hauling on a frozen rope while snow comes at you sideways. Sideways, not falling, travelling. The snow here doesn't drift down like it did at home, soft on the hills above the river. Here it moves horizontally, driven by a wind that comes off glaciers you can hear cracking in the distance like cannon fire. And it hits your face like thrown sand, and it finds every gap in your clothing, and your clothing is all gaps now, after 14 months at sea. The wool of your jacket has worn to the thickness of paper across the shoulders. Your shirt beneath it is stiff with salt and grease, and things you've stopped naming. Your feet are wrapped in rags inside shoes that stopped being shoes months ago, and are now just leather ideas. You haul. The block above you shrieks. The yard comes around, degree by frozen degree, and the sail cracks full of wind with a sound like a whip the size of a house, and the Victoria heels, and the black water hisses along her side close enough to touch, cold enough that touching it for a quarter of an hour would stop your heart. Belay, the boatswain roars, and you belay, wrapping the line around the pin with hands you can no longer feel as separate fingers, only as blunt, aching paddles. And then you stand there in the shrieking dark, chest heaving, and you allow yourself one thought. This same thought you've allowed yourself every night for weeks now. Nobody knows where we are, not your mother. Not the King of Spain, who paid for this. Not the pilots down in the great chart house in Seville with their compasses and their parchments. Not even, you suspect, though you would never say it. Saying it is close to mutiny, and you have seen with your own eyes what happens to mutineers, not even the Captain General himself. Ferno de Magalhães, Fernando de Magallanes, as the Castilians say it. The small limping Portuguese with the black beard and the eyes that never rest, who swore before God and the King that there is a strait through this continent, a passage from the ocean sea to the South Sea, a back door to the Spice Islands and to wealth beyond the dreams of Castile. He swore it exists. He has been swearing it for over a year, and for over a year the coast of this endless land has answered him with nothing but bays that close into rivers, rivers that close into marshes, and marshes that close into mud. Until now. Maybe, because the water under your keel tonight is not fresh. You tasted it yourself this afternoon. Hauled a bucket, dipped 2 cracked fingers, touched them to your tongue, and your heart did something strange in your chest. Salt. Deep in the land, days deep into this channel, past cliffs and narrows and mountains with snow down to the tide line, and the water is still salt. Rivers are fresh. Bays are fresh at the bottom. This is neither. This might be it. This might actually be the passage. Or it might be one more trap, one more dead end, and you will all turn around again and sail back out into the winter. And this time, you've heard the men whispering it at the pumps. This time the food will not last the return. You blow into your ruined hands and look at the shore. And the shore is looking back. Fires. On the southern land, low on the black hills, points of orange light in the darkness. Not one. Many. They have burned every night since you entered these waters. Someone is out there, in that frozen wilderness, tending flames, watching your 3 ships crawl past their coast. You've never seen the people who feed those fires. Nobody has. The men have already given the land a name because of them. Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. The wind screams in the rigging, a high, mad note that never fully stops. And somewhere below your feet, in the dark of the hold, the pump clanks and the rats move through the ballast stones, and 800 leagues of unmapped ocean lie between you and the nearest place with a name. You're inside the blank part of the map. You live here now. And this is how you learn the first rule of the bottom of the world. It does not care whether you believe in it. To understand how a shipwright's boy from Baracaldo ends up here, at the end of everything, you have to go back 14 months to a morning in August of 1519 on the river at Seville, when 5 ships dropped down the Guadalquivir with the tide and the whole city came out to watch. You remember the smell of that morning better than the sight of it. Orange peel and tar, bilge water and incense. A priest had blessed the fleet at Santa Maria de la Victoria, and the smoke of it still clung to the sails. Fresh bread from the ovens on the bank, the last fresh bread, though you didn't know that yet. 237 men, more or less, on 5 ships. The Trinidad, the flagship, 110 tons, with the Captain General's flag at her mast. The San Antonio, the biggest, 120 tons. The Concepcion, your own Victoria, 85 tons, and the little Santiago, the Scout, 75 tons, quick as a gull. You signed on as a grummet, a ship's boy. The lowest rung of the ladder that goes boy, seaman, master's mate, master, pilot, captain. Your pay is 800 maravedis a month, which sounded like a fortune in Baracaldo, and which you have never once seen, because pay is settled at the end of a voyage, and the end of this voyage is a thing men have stopped discussing. A grummet's work is everything nobody else wants. You turn the sand glass every half hour, all watch long, and sing out the turning, because the glass is the ship's only clock, and if you let it run out unturned, the pilot's reckoning is ruined, and the beating you get will be honest and thorough. You scrub, you haul, you climb. You serve their men their food and eat yours last. You sleep where there is space, which is nowhere. So you sleep on deck with a coil of rope for a pillow when it's warm, and packed with the other boys in the reeking dark between decks when it isn't. Privacy is a word. You heard it once. Yeah, you share your sleeping space with 3 other boys and a coil of anchor cable. That's normal. Everyone below the rank of master sleeps wherever their body fits. At least Domingo, the boy from Bilbao who sleeps pressed against your back, doesn't talk in his sleep anymore. He used to talk in his sleep. He used to talk about his sisters and food and a girl in the Triana district. He stopped somewhere off the coast of Brazil. Everybody stops eventually. The sea sands you down. The men around you are from everywhere, and that surprised you at first. Basques like you. So many Basques the officers curse in Castilian, and the rigging answers in Euskera. Castilians. Portuguese. Following their Captain General even though Portugal has put a price on his success. Genoese and Venetians. Greeks. A German gunner. A black man from the Portuguese islands. An Englishman of all things. Master gunner on the flagship. And one Italian gentleman from Vicenza, a passenger, a scholar named Antonio Pigafetta, who pays his way by being curious. He writes everything down, everything in a little book, and the men think he's touched in the head, and you carry water to him sometimes, and he asks you questions about Basque words, and writes down your answers as if the mutterings of a ship's boy were worth ink. You like him. He's the only man aboard who seems to think all this is wonderful. Because here is the thing nobody tells you when you sign the articles, the thing you learned in the first month. A ship is not an adventure. A ship is a barrel, a wooden barrel, 85 tons, packed with men and salt meat and wine and rats, sealed with tar and thrown at the horizon. Everything in it rots. The water goes green in the casks, then brown, then it grows things, and you drink it anyway, holding your nose, cutting it with wine while the wine lasts. The biscuit, the twice-baked bread that is the floor of your whole diet, starts hard as roof tile and honest, and then the weevils find it, and then the worms, and by now, 14 months out, the biscuit is not really bread anymore. It is a grey powder held together by habit, and it smells, and I need you to understand this exactly. It smells like the urine of rats, because that is what has soaked into it, in the dark of the bread room month after month. You eat it anyway. You eat it, and you feel the little bodies of the weevils pop between your teeth. And the first time it happened, you gagged and Domingo laughed at you, and now you don't even notice. Now the weevils are just texture, and that fact, that you have become a boy who doesn't notice, frightens you more than the storms do. The rats themselves go for half a ducat. I want to stay on that for a moment, because it tells you everything. A rat. A ship's rat, greasy, fed on the fleet's own bread, sells among the crew for half a gold ducat. Money that would have bought a week of dinners in Seville buys one rat here, and there are men on a waiting list, and there are boys, you are one of them, who have learned to hunt the ballast in the dark with a belaying pin and steady breathing, because a boy who can catch rats is a boy with wealth. And you gave your last one to Domingo when his gums started bleeding, and he cried, and neither of you ever mentioned it again. That's the ship. That's the barrel you live in. And for the first year, the barrel was at least pointed somewhere warm. The Atlantic taught you the trade the hard way, which is the only way the trade is taught. Your first storm came in the Gulf of Guinea. Weeks of squalls and calms alternating like a fever, and you learned what a squall does to a boy who has tied a bad knot. It finds it. The sea audits everything. A sheet you belayed carelessly at noon lets go at midnight with a crack like a musket, and the sail flogs itself half to rags before the watch can tame it, and the master doesn't even beat you for it. Which is worse, he just makes you sit and watch the sailmaker repair the damage stitch by stitch, hour by hour, an old man's needle hand rising and falling by lantern light, and he says nothing the whole time, and by the end you would have preferred the beating. You learned the watches until they replaced your heartbeat. 4 hours on, 4 off, around the clock. The whole company split into 2 watches, turn and turn about, so that no man on a ship of this age ever once sleeps a full night. Think about that. 14 months and counting without one whole night of sleep. And then think about what it means that nobody complains, because there'd be nothing to compare it to. The broken sleep is the water you swim in. You learned that the worst watch is the middle, midnight to 4, when the body's fire burns lowest and the dead are said to walk, and the best is the morning, when the light comes up out of the sea like forgiveness. You learn to sleep in rain. You learn to sleep standing for 90 seconds at a time against the mainmast, with your arm through a loop of line so the roll wouldn't take you, waking before the boatswain saw, and art every grimet perfects or suffers. You learned the fire. The cook's hearth is a box of sand on the deck, and the fire in it is the most carefully guarded thing aboard after the compass, because a ship is a bomb of tar and hemp and dry wood, and fire loose on a ship is a death worse than the seas. You carried the embers in an iron pot when the hearth was doused for weather, cradled it like a relic, and the cook, the humming Genoese, taught you to feed a fire in a gale 1 splinter at a time hunched over it, making your body the wall, and he told you, humming between the words, that a cook who loses his fire feeds 90 men cold slush and is the most hated creature on the ocean, and a cook who loses control of it kills them all. And that is cooking, boy. The whole art of it. Everything at sea lives on a knife. And you learned St. Elmo. 1 black roaring night off Guinea, with the fleet scattered and lightning walking on the water, a light appeared at the masthead. Not fire. A cold flame, blue-white, hissing faintly, sitting on the very truck of the mainmast like a lamp lit by nobody, and the men fell to their knees on the streaming deck, all of them, the hardest men you'd ever seen, weeping and calling it the body of the saint, San Telmo, come to stand his watch, this sailor's own saint who promises the ship that carries him will not be lost that night. And whatever the philosophers may one day call that light, I will tell you what you saw from the deck. You saw 60 terrified men shown a light in the exact place and hour they most needed one, and you saw the storm break up before dawn, and if you want to argue about what it was, you were not there, and they were, down the long coast of Africa, then the great blue leap west across the ocean sea, and the line, the equator, where the old sailors solemnly informed the boys that the sea below the line was inhabited by different fish, different stars and different rules, and 2 of those 3 things turned out to be true. The pole star sank behind you night by night, your one fixed friend in the sky going down into the sea like a stone sinking in reverse, and the night it failed to rise at all, something in your chest failed to rise with it. The pilot steered by new marks after that, by the strange southern lights, and you understood for the first time, bodily, below argument, that you had gone somewhere from which the way home was not a straight line. Brazil, when it came, was Eden with the paint still wet. Versin, the men called the coast, after the red dye wood. 13 days at anchor in a bay so beautiful the fleet's discipline softened like tar in the sun, fresh water and silver ropes off the green hills, pineapples, You had no word for them. Sweet flesh like nothing in Spain, and Pigafetta wrote 3 sentences about them and crossed 2 out. Defeated. The people came out in dugouts, generous, curious, wearing feathers and nothing much else to the great scandal and greater interest of the crew, and trade ran like a spring flood. For a fish hook, 4 fowls and a basket of potatoes. For a comb, 2 fat geese. For a little bell, a basket of fish that fed a mess for a day. For a king of playing cards, Pigafetta swears this, and you saw the fowls come aboard, 6 chickens, and the seller certain he had robbed the buyer blind. Both sides walked away smug. That is the best kind of trade and the rarest, and it did not in the history that came after happen often again, and let that sit where it sits. You turned 17 somewhere off that coast. You told no one. Domingo found out anyway. He had seen the articles when you both signed. He remembers things. It is his one gift and his curse. And at the evening meal he slipped into your hand, wordless, wrapped in a leaf, a piece of Brazilian sugar cane he'd been hoarding for 11 days, and you ate it slowly down at the rail with your back to the ship, and it was the finest birthday of your life to that hour, and it may, all things counted, still be. You crossed the ocean sea to Brazil, and Brazil was a green dream. Fresh water, pineapples, parrots, people who traded a basket of sweet potatoes for a fish hook, and a king's ransom of fish for a playing card. The men still talk about Brazil the way old men talk about their first love, then south, and the green thinned, and the air sharpened, and the coast turned grey and endless, and the Captain General began his hunt. Every opening in that coast he entered. Every bay, every estuary, every river mouth wide enough to fool a hopeful eye. In January of 1520 you entered a gulf so vast the far shore vanished. The men were embracing, weeping, certain this was the strait, and it was a river. The greatest river any of you had ever seen, fresh water pushing brown into the ocean for leagues, the river they now call the Plate. And it was only a river, and the ships turned south again in silence. South, always south, the sun lower every week, the nights longer. The seals appeared, and the black and white birds that swim like fish and bray like donkeys. The men called them ducks without wings, and Pigafetta wrote them down delighted, while the crew clubbed them by the 100 and salted them into barrels, because meat is meat. And then the Captain General did the thing that nearly broke the fleet. On the last day of March, 1520, with the southern winter closing in and the coast showing nothing but desolation, he took the 5 ships into a bleak little bay at 49 degrees south, a pocket of grey water ringed by grey hills, called it Puerto San Julian, and announced that the fleet would winter there. And he cut the rations. Think about what that means to men 14 months from home. They had signed on for a voyage to the Spice Islands by a short new route. The route had not appeared. The coast had gone on, colder and emptier, and now the Portuguese captain, the foreigner, and half the Castilian officers had hated him since Seville precisely because he was Portuguese and secretive and would not share his plans. This foreigner was telling Spanish gentlemen that they would sit out a winter at the frozen end of nowhere on shortened bread for the sake of a strait that might not exist. You were there for what happened next. You will be an old man some day if God is unusually generous, and you will still be able to hear it. It began on the night of Easter Sunday, the 1st of April, shouting across the water in the dark, a boat moving between ships when no boat should be moving. By morning, 3 of the 5 ships, the San Antonio, the Concepcion, and your own Victoria, were in the hands of mutineers, Castilian captains and officers who declared they were taking the fleet home to Spain, and the Captain General on the Trinidad held one ship and the little Santiago and nothing else. He was outnumbered 3-2. He was finished. Everyone said so in whispers in the dark of the 'tween decks. Everyone was wrong. What he did with a boat, a letter, and arithmetic. He sent a longboat to the Victoria, your ship, carrying his master-at-arms, Espinosa, and a handful of men, with a letter for the mutineer Captain Mendoza, inviting him to talk. Mendoza read the letter at the rail. Mendoza smiled at it. And Espinosa drew a dagger and put it into Mendoza's throat, and before the crew of the Victoria could even understand what they were seeing, a second boatload of the Captain General's loyal men came over the other rail, and the ship was taken back between two turnings of the sand glass. You stood frozen by the mainmast through all of it, 16 years old, pressed against the wood like you could become part of it, and a man died 8 feet from you with a sound you will not describe to anyone, ever. And the deck needed scrubbing afterward, and you were a grummet, so you scrubbed it. Cold water, a stiff brush, your own hands, pink and then red and then numb. That is how history feels from underneath. It feels like scrubbing. With the Victoria retaken, the arithmetic flipped. 3 ships against 2. And the Captain General anchored across the mouth of the bay so no one could run. And the mutiny died of hopelessness within a day. And then came the reckonings. And I will give them to you the way the fleet received them. Plainly, because that is how they were meant. As lessons. Mendoza was dead already. His body was quartered and displayed. Quisada, the captain of the Concepcion, a gentleman of good family, was beheaded by his own servant, who agreed to swing the sword in exchange for his own life. And Juan de Cartagena, the highest-born man in the fleet, the king's own inspector, too noble to execute, was rowed to the beach when the fleet finally left, with a priest who had conspired with him, and a small stock of biscuit and wine, and marooned. Left standing on the shingle of the loneliest coast on earth as the ships grew small. You were coiling line on the stern and you watched him until distance turned him into a mark, and then into nothing, and no European ever saw either man again. Nobody talked about it afterward. That was the strange part. 200 men, and a silence you could stand a spoon in. But the fleet obeyed. Oh, how the fleet obeyed after San Julian. The winter itself at San Julian after the reckonings was its own long schooling, and you should have the texture of it, because 5 months is not a scene, it is a sentence served. The ships were hove down in turn for careening, hauled over on their sides in the shallows at low tide so the weed and worm could be burned and scraped from their bottoms. And careening in that climate is work out of a sermon on purgatory. Fires of driftwood and seal blubber under the exposed hull, the stink of scorched tar and burnt barnacle rolling down the beach, and the boys in the freezing shallows with scrapers, up to the waist at the turn of the tide, working the iron along the planks while the cold climbed your body like a rising tide of its own, and the men worked in shifts of half a glass, a quarter hour. That was the most flesh could bear in that water, and ran ashore to the fires and stood in the smoke shuddering and went back in. The Victoria's bottom, when you got her clean, was sound as a bell, Basque oak, and Bautista slapped the wet planking the way a man slaps a good horse, and said to the hull, not to any person, "There's my girl," and every man on the beach pretended not to have heard the tenderness in it, which is the courtesy sailors pay each other in the presence of love. Hunting parties went inland and came back with guanaco, when God was kind, and with nothing but windburn when he was not. You went twice. The land behind the bay was a country of gravel and silver scrub running away flat forever under the biggest sky you had ever stood beneath. And the wind in that country never stops. Never. It is not weather there. It is the landlord, and it strips the heat off a walking man like bark off a green stick. You saw the giants' hearths on the far hills. You found ostrich eggs, the small ostrich of that country, the rhea, each egg a meal for 2 men, buried in warm sand by the nest, and you carried 4 of them back inside your shirt against your skin like treasure, like your own unborn luck, walking with the careful gait of a man made of glass. And Domingo laughed at you for a full minute when you unloaded them at the fire and then ate his half of the first one in a silence that was its own apology. And the dark. The winter dark at 49 South is not the dark of Spain. 7 hours of grey light, 17 of night, week upon week, and the fleet fought the dark the way fleets always have, with routine and with fire and with each other. The priests kept every feast. The men mended and carved. The winter's great craze was little ships, models of the fleet whittled from driftwood, rigged with unlaid yarn, and by August there was a whole miniature armada on the shelf of the Victoria's forecastle, and a court of grave judges awarding prizes of tobacco and thread, and grown men who had watched executions in April arguing in November about the correct rake of a toy mainmast. And if you think that small, you have never wintered anywhere. Smallness is the raft. You cross the great dark on the raft of small things, and any man who's done it will tell you so, and the men who won't tell you didn't cross, not all the way, not with everything aboard. I tell you all this not because tonight's story is about the mutiny. It isn't. But because you cannot understand the men on these ships now, in October, in the channel of the fires, without it. Every man hauling line beside you in the dark has spent a winter starving in San Julian. Every man has seen what the Captain General does to those who turn back, and every man knows, in the sums he does at night instead of sleeping, that the food remaining in the holds is no longer enough to reach home the way they came. There is no way out of this but through. That winter at San Julian gave you one other thing, and it was wonder, and you hold on to it the way you'd hold a coal in cupped hands. For weeks the land seemed utterly empty. Grey scrub, guanacos on the hills, wind. And then one day a man appeared on the beach. The men who saw him first swear he was dancing, singing, throwing dust on his own head. A greeting, they think, some ritual of the open country. And he was enormous. You saw him yourself when they brought him aboard. And your head. You are not a small boy. Your head came to somewhere near the bottom of his ribs. The men of the fleet reached his waist. A giant wrapped in stitched guanaco skins with the fur turned inward, his face painted red with yellow rings around the eyes, his hair whitened with dust, and on his feet wrapped hides stuffed with straw against the cold, which made his footprints monstrous in the sand. Big feet. Patagonese, someone said. The men argue to this day about what exactly the Captain General meant by it. And the name stuck to the man, and then to his people, and then to the entire land. Patagonia, the country of the big feet. That's already a thing in 1520 born on that beach, and it will outlive everyone aboard, and everyone they know, and the kingdom that sent them. The giant was friendly. His people were friendly, mostly curious, fast as horses across the open ground, capable of putting an arrow through a guanaco at a distance you would not believe, Pigafetta filled pages. He sat with them and pointed at things, head, hand, fire, star, and wrote their words in his little book, the first dictionary of the bottom of the world, 90 words of a language no European had ever heard, written by lamplight in a leaking cabin by a seasick Italian. When one of the giants was shown his own face in a steel mirror, he leapt backward in such terror that he knocked down 4 of your shipmates. He had never seen himself before. Think about that tonight. Warm in your bed. He was perhaps 40 years old, and he had never once seen his own face. And then the Captain General ordered 2 of the giants seized to bring to the king. Iron shackles snapped on their ankles by men who let them think the shackles were gifts, and the friendliness ended the way it always ends, and you were ashamed, and you said nothing, because you are a grummet, and grummets are furniture with hands. The winter ground on. The Santiago, the little scout, was sent south to explore and was wrecked in the river-mouth storm. Every man survived except one, and 2 of them walked 11 days back overland through the frozen scrub to bring the news. And when they staggered into camp, you did not recognize them, and these were men you had diced with. The fleet was 4 ships now. The days at San Julian were 7 hours of grey light. Your gums ached. Everyone's gums ached, and still south. In late August, the 4 remaining ships crept out of that cursed bay and down the coast and waited out more storms in another bleak river anchorage. And then, on the 21st of October, 1520, the feast of St. Ursula and the 11,000 virgins, the lookouts raised a headland, a wall of white cliffs, and beyond it an opening in the coast, wide and deep-looking and grim, running away west into mountains. The Captain General named the headland Cabo Virgenes for the day. The pilots looked into that opening and told each other quietly, professionally, that it was another bay, that it was closed, that they'd wasted hope on 100 of these already. Some of the officers wanted to sail on past without even looking. The Captain General sent 2 ships in to look, the San Antonio and the Concepcion, ordered them to probe the opening and return within 5 days. And on the first night, God sat down on the fleet. A storm came out of the northeast, out of nowhere, the way weather is born in these latitudes, a clear horizon at one glass and a screaming wall of white at the next. And it caught your ship and the Trinidad in the open roadstead with anchors down and dragged them. And for 2 days you did not sleep. You existed from rope to rope, bailing and hauling and praying in 2 languages, and through all of it every man who could spare a glance was staring at the opening in the cliffs where the other 2 ships had gone. Because that storm had blown straight into it, straight into a closed bay if it was a closed bay, and ships embayed on a lee shore in such a wind do not come out. They become wreckage, and then they become a story, and then not even that. 5 days, no ships. You know what despair sounds like on a vessel of 60 men? It sounds like nothing. It sounds like men doing their work with their mouths shut. The cook stopped humming. That was the worst of it somehow. The cook, a Genoese, hummed through everything, hummed through San Julian, hummed through the executions, and that week he cooked in silence, and the silence came off him like cold off ice. And then, at the edge of the 5th day, smoke. A signal on the water inside the entrance. Then sails. Then 2 ships, both of them, alive, flying every flag they owned. And as they closed with the fleet, you heard a sound rolling across the water ahead of them, and it took you a moment to understand it because you had not heard it in over a year. Cheering. Guns firing in salute and men cheering. The storm that should have killed them had saved everyone, driven before it into the opening, Unable to turn, the two ships had been flung past the first narrows, a throat of water where the tide runs like a mill race, into a broad reach beyond, and then through a second narrows into another, wider reach. And everywhere they sounded, the water was deep, absurdly deep. No river shallows, no closing marsh, and everywhere they tasted, the water was salt. Fully, deeply salt, with a tide that rose and fell like the pulse of something alive. Bay's end. This did not end. It went on, west and south, salt and deep, into the mountains. They stood on the decks and cheered because every man of them understood at once what no man dared say for a year. The back door was real. You watched the Captain General receive the news at the rail of the Trinidad, close enough across the water to see him clearly, the officers around him shouting, embracing, and Magellan, the Iron Man, the man who marooned nobles and beheaded gentlemen, the man you have feared with a pure and simple fear for 14 months. Magellan wept. You saw it. He turned his face away from his officers toward the opening in the cliffs, and his shoulders were shaking, and Pigafetta was scribbling like a madman, and the wind was screaming its one mad note, and somewhere below somebody was already re-rigging the pumps. The fleet entered the strait on the Feast of All Saints, and he named it for the day the Channel of All Saints. The men, then and forever after, called it by the only other name that fit, the Strait of Magellan. And that is where you are tonight, hauling frozen rope in the sideways snow, with fires burning on the southern shore, inside the miracle, which is the moment, of course, when the miracle begins to show its teeth. Those first days inside the entrance deserve their own telling, because before the maze showed its teeth, it showed its throat, and the throat alone would have made this voyage famous. The first narrows, the men called the place, a gut of water barely a league wide between low banks, where the whole tide of an ocean pours through twice a day, and the current runs faster than a ship can sail against, so that passage is not a matter of skill, but of appointment. You wait for the tide, and when it turns it takes you, ready or not. And the Victoria went through the gut with the helm hard over, and the bank sliding past at the speed of a galloping horse, the water around her boiling in smooth, strange upwellings, great slick circles blooming on the surface like something breathing underneath, and the leadsman calling depths that made no sense. 40 fathoms in mid-channel, and the banks a musket shot away, and old Bautista at the con with his walnut face absolutely still, and his knuckles white on the rail, which is how you knew, more than from anything he said, that no man aboard had ever in his life seen water behave this way. Beyond the first narrows, a broad reach, calm as a lake, where the fleet anchored and the boats went ashore and found. Nobody speaks of this much, and you understand why, and I will tell you anyway, because you are in the boat. A dead whale, stranded, long dead, on the tide flats, and around and beyond it, on the low rises above the beach, a burial ground. Not of whales, raised platforms of lashed wood, and on them, wrapped forms, and around them, planted upright in the earth, the great rib bones of whales arching over the dead like the frames of an unbuilt church. 200 graves, some of the men counted. You did not count. You stood at the edge of it with your cap in your hands. You had taken your cap off without deciding to, everyone had. And the wind came off the land through the whale rib arches with a low, mournful fluting, the bones themselves sounding, and the boat's crew withdrew to the beach without an order given quietly, walking backward the first few steps, and it was not fear, or not only fear, it was the sensation, sudden and total, of being a guest who has wandered into the wrong room of a very old house, and the room is the family chapel, and the family is watching from somewhere you cannot see. The second narrows then, another gut, another galloping tide, and beyond it the land changed as if a page had turned. The low, pale steps of the entrance fell away astern, and the mountains came up ahead, white-toothed, crowding the water, and the strait bent southwest into them, and stopped pretending to be anything gentle. It was in that bend that you passed the broad opening on the southern side where the fires burned thickest, whole constellations of them at night up the unknown sound, and the pilots argued for a day about whether the true passage might lie that way, and the Captain General looked long at it, and chose the mountains instead, and he chose right. The fire's sound leads to blind water, the world will learn eventually, and you have wondered since how many of the great turnings of history have looked like this. A tired man at a rail in bad light, choosing between two darknesses, getting it right, and never knowing how close the wrong one came. It was here too that the fleet took its stock of the strait's one luxury, the sardines. The sheltered reach behind a wooded point ran silver with them at dusk, acres of water shivering, and the men took them with cast nets and with buckets, with their hats, laughing, actual laughter, the first in weeks, echoing off the ice. And the cook fried them in the last of the good oil, and you ate fresh hot fish under falling snow with the aurora beginning to breathe green behind the peaks. And Domingo said with his mouth full, solemn as a bishop, "This is the best meal ever eaten by anyone, and you have eaten at better tables since," and he was right, and nothing has ever come close. Because here is what nobody in Seville could have imagined, and what you are learning hour by hour. A strait is not a door. A strait is a maze. This one is 350 miles of channels, and the channels branch, and the branches branch, and every branch looks like the way through, and most of them are lies. Sounds that run for a day and close into walls of rock, bays within bays, fjords that wind between mountains until the sky is a grey ribbon overhead and then simply stop, dead water under a glacier, and you turn the ship around. And turning a ship in a fjord with the wind funneling and the water too deep to anchor, that is an afternoon of work that ages the pilot a year. Too deep to anchor. Let me make you feel that one, because it is the strangest fear of the whole passage. In most of these reaches the lead line goes down. You've handled the lead yourself, a plummet of grey metal on a marked line, the bottom of it hollowed and packed with tallow to bring up a kiss of the seabed, sand or shell or mud, and the line runs out through your fingers, 20 fathoms, 50, 100, all of it, and never touches. The mountains here plunge straight down and keep plunging, which means that at night, or when the williwaws come, you often cannot simply stop and hold on. There is nothing to hold on to. The land offers you cliffs, and the sea offers you no floor, and the ship must keep moving, or find one of the rare shelf anchorages the boats have scouted, and pray the anchors bite, and pray the wind does not turn. The williwaws. You didn't have a word for them, so the word arrived later from other sailors in other centuries, but you know the thing itself better than anyone alive. The glaciers up in the mountains chill the air until it is heavy as water, and it pools up there in the ice fields, and then it spills. It falls down the mountain walls like an avalanche made of nothing, and hits the water at the bottom hard enough to flatten it white, hard enough to lay a ship on her beam ends with no warning at all, or no cloud, no darkening, nothing. You will be standing in a flat calm, actual glassy calm, the reflections of the peaks perfect in the black water, and then there is a sound like tearing canvas from a direction that makes no sense, from above, and the master screams to let fly the sheets, and if the men at the lines are quick, the ship staggers and shakes herself and survives, and if they are slow, the second williwaw of your first week in the strait blew the Concepcion's foresail out of its bolt ropes entire, whole, gone, flying away down the channel like an enormous escaped ghost, and the men watched it go in complete silence. And then someone laughed, high and strange, and the boatswain hit him, not hard, just to close the door that laugh was opening. That is the strait, beauty that wants to kill you. Because it is beautiful. You have to hear this part too, because it's true, and because it's half of what makes the place so wrong. You have seen things in these 2 weeks that no one you will ever meet will believe. Mountains that come out of the sea already white, ice glowing blue-green in their cracks like something lit from inside. Waterfalls that fall so far the wind tears them into smoke before they land. Whole hillsides of southern beach turning autumn red. Except it's spring here. October is spring at the bottom of the world. The seasons hang upside down like everything else. Dolphins in water so cold it smokes at dawn. And once at first light a glacier carved into the sea a mile off, and the wave came across and lifted the Victoria gently. Once, like a mother checking on a sleeping child, and the sound arrived afterward, rolling around the mountains for the better part of a minute, and every man on deck stood still until it finished, and nobody said anything, because what is there to say? Pigafetta says it is the most beautiful strait in the world. Pigafetta also nearly went over the side yesterday, leaning out to look at a cormorant. The men have assigned Domingo to hold the back of his coat. Your days inside the maze have a shape now, and the shape is this. The boats go first. The fleet cannot risk 4 ships in an unsounded channel, so the work of finding the way falls to the ship's boats. Open longboats, oars and a scrap of sail, packed with men and lead lines and a few days' biscuit, and the boats crawl ahead into the branches like fingers feeling in the dark, and the fleet follows where they beckon. You have pulled an oar in the Victoria's boat 6 of the last 10 days. Your palms, which were leather after a year at sea, have opened up again and re-healed into something like tree bark, and there is a click in your right shoulder now that wasn't there before, a small dry click on every stroke, tick, 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 10,000 times a day. And at night when you finally lie down, the shoulder goes on rowing without you, jumping and twitching under the skin, and you lie there in the dark between Domingo and the cable, listening to your own body keep working, and that is what tired means now. Tired went past sleepiness long ago. Tired is when the machine keeps running after you've left it. The cold in the boat is a different cold from the deck. On deck you can move, stamp, swing your arms. In the boat you're rowing, which should warm you, and it does warm your core, and meanwhile your feet sit in 2 inches of freezing bilge water going slowly to wood, and the spray freezes in your eyebrows, and the man at the tiller, old Bautista, the Victoria's master, 40 years at sea, a face like a walnut, sits wrapped to the eyes watching the water ahead, and every so often he says one word, sound, and you ship your oar and the lead goes down and the line burns out through your fists and you call the fathoms and Bautista grunts and you row on. Hour after hour, the mountains slide past. The fires burn on the southern shores in the evenings and are gone by morning. only smoke, and once, footprints in the black sand of a beach where you landed to fill water casks. A fire pit still warm, shell heaps, the bones of seals cracked for marrow, and the hair stood up on your arms, not from fear exactly, from the size of it. Someone lives here. Someone has always lived here, in a place that has just this month acquired a European name, and they are watching your boats crawl their channels, and they have decided so far not to be seen. You filled the casks fast that day. Water, at least, the strait gives freely, and after the green casks of the ocean, it is a kind of miracle. Glacier melt running down every cliff face, so cold it aches in your teeth, and so clean it tastes like nothing at all, like drinking the idea of water. And there is fresh food if you work for it. Mussels on the tide rocks, big as your hand, prized loose with your knife while the surf tries to take you, your fingers bleeding around the shells. The men boil them in seawater in the copper, and for half an hour the whole ship smells like the harbour at home, and men close their eyes over their bowls. Fish. Herbs one of the Greeks swears by, a scurvy grass he makes the boys chew, bitter as sin, and there is the wood. The whole strait is furred with the low, iron-hard, sweet-smelling tree, and the smoke of it is fragrant, and the Captain General has ordered the hold stuffed with cut boughs of it, and one of the reaches now carries the name he gave for the fine sardines there, and another for the endless bays, and Pigafetta writes each name into his book, and this is how a blank space stops being blank. One exhausted boy with a lead line at a time. But the biscuit is still the biscuit. The salt meat is still going, cask by cask, and some casks come up spoiled, and everyone pretends not to do the arithmetic, and everyone does the arithmetic, and the fleet is not at peace. You feel it before you understand it. The way you feel weather coming in your bad shoulder. It moves between the ships in the boats, in the shouted conferences at the rails, in the way the San Antonio, the biggest ship with the biggest share of the fleet's remaining stores in her hold. Remember that. Hold that fact for later. The way the San Antonio hangs back, answers signals slowly, anchors a little apart. Her pilot is a man named Estevan Gomez. Portuguese, like the Captain General. Brilliant, everyone says so. And he hates Magellan with the particular acid of a countryman passed over. Gomez wanted a fleet of his own from the King of Spain, wanted this fleet, and instead he pilots a ship in the shadow of the man who got it. Now, with the strait found, and the glory of the discovery already secured, Gomes has begun saying aloud what half the officers think in silence. The passage exists, good, wonderful, it is proven. So let us go home and report it, refit, and return with fresh ships and full holds to actually use it. Because the South Sea beyond this strait is of unknown size. Because no man alive knows how far it is from here to the Spice Islands. Because the food will not bear an ocean of unknown width on top of everything already spent. He is not a coward, whatever the loyalists mutter. That is the terrible part. You have run his words through your head at night, and the words are sane. The food arithmetic is his arithmetic, and it is yours, and it is everyone's. The Captain General called a council to answer him, and here he did a strange and rather beautiful thing, a thing that tells you he learned something at San Julian, even while he was teaching everyone else. He asked formally in writing for the opinion of every pilot and officer in the fleet on whether to go on, listened to the answers, and then announced that the fleet would go on if they had to eat the leather off the yards. Those words went through the 4 ships in about an hour, the way words do. He said them like a man making a promise. The men repeated them like men repeating a curse, and you, turning your sand glass in the dark, filed them away as an exaggeration. Remember that too. File it where you file the San Antonio's full hold. Let me give you one whole day of the strait from the inside, because a single day carried honestly is worth 10 summarized, and because this particular day you will keep until you die. It is the day of the long landing, in the reach the Captain General named for the sardines. It begins before light with Bautista's boot nudging your ribs. Gently. He wakes boys gently and men roughly, and you have wondered which you'll be when the boot changes. Boat's crew, water and wood, detail, plus soundings on the far shore. You break your fast on the day's fistful of grey powder and a cup of glacier water, and you're over the side into the longboat while the stars are still out, and the cold of the thwart comes through your clothes like a blade through cheese, and you pulled for the southern shore with the breath of 8 men making one cloud over the boat. The landing beach is black sand and pebbles the size of loaves, and the surf here is small, but it is ice, and there is no way to land dry, so you go over the gunwale into it thigh deep. The cold is not a feeling, it is a sound, a white note that starts in your shins and rings straight up through the top of your skull, and you run the boat up with the others, and then you stand on the unmoving ground of the Land of Fire itself, one of the first dozen Europeans ever to do it, and what you mostly feel is your feet, screaming, wood first. The iron trees grow to the tide line, low and wind-crippled, every branch swept east like hair in a gale, even on this still morning. A whole forest flinching from a wind that isn't blowing, which tells you everything about the wind that usually is. The axes ring. The wood is so hard it turns an edge in an hour, and it burns hot and long and sweet. And you drag the cut boughs to the boat in loads that leave your arms dead, over ground that is not ground but a soaked sponge of moss, centuries deep, that swallows your leg to the knee without warning and gives it back reluctantly, with a sucking gasp, minus a shoe as often as not. You learn to read the moss by colour. Red gold holds, bright green lies, then water. The casks trundle to the stream, and the stream so cold the casks frost as you fill them. And then, while the rest load, Bautista takes you and one other up the ridge behind the beach, because from the ships they had seen something on the height, and the Captain General wants eyes on it. It is a fish weir. Stones, hundreds of them, carried and placed in a curve across the tidal shallows of a lagoon behind the ridge. A trap that fills at high water and strands the fish at low. Old. You can see it is old. The stones furred with weed and barnacle in a way that takes lifetimes, and mended recently freshly, some stones bare and newly set. And beside the lagoon, in an overhang of rock, a camp, not a ruin, a camp, a ring of firestones still warm enough to smoke faintly in the morning cold, heaps of mussel shell higher than your head, generations of dinners, a half-finished basket of split root set down mid-weave, the weaver's pattern still readable, as if she had stood up a quarter hour ago and walked into the trees, which, you understand, with the hair rising on your arms again, is exactly what she did. Bautista looks at it all a long time. He does not touch the basket. He puts out a hand to stop the other man from touching it, and then he does something you think about on night watches still. He takes from inside his coat his own knife, not the ship's, his horn-handled, 40 years of his thumb worn into it, and he sets it down by the basket on a flat stone deliberately, like a man paying a toll or leaving an offering. He could not himself have told you which. And he jerks his head back toward the beach, and you go down the ridge in silence, and behind you the smoke of the watching fires rises from 3 separate headlands where there was smoke from 2 before. They saw the whole thing. You are certain of it. You are certain they watched the knife laid down, and you are certain in some way you cannot defend that the knife made a difference, that somewhere in the ledger this coast keeps, a small entry went down in your fleet's favour. The people of that shore, canoe people, fire people, who go near naked in this cold with their skins greased against it, and carry embers with them in their very boats on beds of sand. Whole families afloat around a living flame, a hearth with a hull, which when you finally saw one from a distance struck you as the bravest arrangement for living you had ever heard of. Those people never once, in all the fleet's weeks in the strait, attacked, stole, or showed a spear point. They watched. 2 peoples slid past each other at the bottom of the world, a boat's length of cold water and an entire universe between them, and did each other no harm. And if you knew how rare that sentence is in the history I carry, you would have it carved somewhere. You pull back to the Victoria in the early dark with the boat loaded to an inch of freeboard, and your soaked legs have gone past pain into wooden absence, and aboard, the cook, humming again by then, this was after the good news, has mussel broth going in the copper, and you drink your bowl with both bark-palmed hands wrapped around the heat of it, standing because sitting has become a thing you fall into rather than choose, and Domingo, who had the shipboard day, gives you his dry stockings without being asked, and takes your wet ones to the rigging without comment, and you sleep that night the whole 4 hours entire. And if I could bottle for you the quality of that sleep, the sleep of a fed boy in dry stockings after honest work, an inch of oak from black water at the end of the earth, I would be selling something better than anything that came out of the Spice Islands. The evenings at anchor in the strait, when there was an anchorage to be had, settled into a liturgy of their own, and you find, telling it now, that these are the hours you would go back for. The ships lay close in the sheltered coves, sterns almost touching, and after the meal the men gathered at the rails and talked ship to ship across the still water, voices carrying flat and clear the way they only do over cold water at dusk. News, jokes, insults, the day's soundings, a man on the Concepcion who sang, really sang, and was made to every night, ballads of home going up between the black walls with the smoke of the fragrant wood, and the ice on the peaks holding the last pink light long after the water had gone to iron, and the fires of the watchers kindling one by one on the southern shore like an answer. 2 fleets of light in the dark, yours and theirs, and the singing between. Pigafetta stood at the rail through all of it with his hands behind his back, not writing for once, just listening, and one such evening he said to you, because you were beside him with the water jug, furniture with hands, he said, in his careful Castilian, "Do you know that no one has ever heard this before, this exact evening?" And you said no one hears any evening twice, Signor, meaning nothing by it, a boy's words, and he turned and looked at you for a long moment, and then took out the little book after all and wrote, and you have wondered for years, with a warmth you can't explain, whether you are in it. The fleet came, in the first days of November, to the place where the maze plays its cruelest trick. The channel splits, hugely, finally, into 2 great arms, one running southeast, one southwest, and no lookout at any masthead can see the end of either. Everything now depends on choosing, so the Captain General split his force. The Trinidad and the Victoria to probe the southwest arm, the San Antonio and the Concepcion ordered into the southeast, with instructions to explore and return to a set rendezvous within a fixed number of days, the San Antonio, with the fleet's largest store of food in her hold and Esteban Gomez at her helm, sent out of everyone's sight into her own channel for days. You watched her go from the Victoria's rail on a grey forenoon, her sails filling and shrinking away between the black walls, and you did not know, nobody in your half of the fleet knew or could have, that you were watching the last of her. But your half of the fleet had its own appointment first, because it was in the southwest arm, in the days that followed, that the strait finally stopped playing with you and reached out and took your ship by the throat. And that is the night I have been walking you toward all evening, the night of the williwaws in the reach with no bottom, the night you stopped being 16 kinds of tired boy and became in the space of 6 turnings of the glass whatever it is you are now. Wrap the blanket tighter. Here it comes. It begins, as the worst things here always begin, with stillness. The 2 ships have worked their way deep into the southwest arm, and the arm has narrowed, and the mountains have closed in until you sail at the bottom of a corridor. Walls of black rock and hanging ice on both sides, so tall that noon lasts an hour, and the rest of the day is a long blue shadow. The water is dead calm, dead. Not a catspaw, not a ripple. The surface black and thick-looking like oil, and the Victoria's sails hang in folds, and the only way to move the ships at all is the boats out ahead. Towing, and you are in the boat, on the oar. Tick, tick, tick goes the shoulder, and your breath makes clouds, and the clouds don't drift anywhere. They just hang around your head, and that is how still it is. Old Bautista does not like it. You can read Bautista now the way you read weather. He keeps looking up, not ahead where a master should look. Up at the rim of the walls, where the last light is turning the hanging glaciers the colour of a wound, and his jaw is working under the wrappings. And finally he says, to nobody, to the air, it's pooling. You don't ask what's pooling. You've been here 2.5 weeks. You know what's pooling. All that cold up there in the ice fields getting heavier. The ships anchor at dusk in the only shelf the boats can find, a knob of drowned moraine off a river mouth, 30 fathoms sloping fast to nothing, bad holding, gravel over rock, the anchor flukes skating before they catch. The Trinidad lies a cable's length away. In the last light you can see men on her deck doing exactly what men on your deck are doing, doubling the anchor cables, sending down the topmast's loose gear, rigging preventers, lashing the boats, moving with a particular economy of sailors who all share one thought, and are all keeping it to themselves. You get 1 hour of sleep. You know it was 1 hour because you turned the glass at the start of it. The sound that wakes you is not wind. That is what you will try to explain later to men who weren't there, and you will watch their faces politely refuse it. The sound arrives before any wind at all, a tearing shriek from overhead, from the black rim of the world, growing, dopplering, the sound of the atmosphere itself coming off the mountain like a landslide, and then the ship is hit. Not healed, hit. The Victoria goes over as if slapped by something the size of a cathedral, and you're thrown out of your nest against the cable, and the ship's timbers make a sound you have never heard wood make, a groan with a scream inside it, and above you on deck the world dissolves into roaring and orders, and the gunfire cracks of canvas gone wild, and you are climbing the ladder before you've decided anything, because the body of a ship's boy, after 14 months, climbs toward the shouting on its own. On deck there is no up, there is no understand. The snow and the spray have merged into a single white substance moving horizontally at a speed that turns lantern light into a solid cone of chaos. And the wind is not gusting. It is falling on you, a waterfall of air, and it drives the breath back into your throat when you face it. And the ship is lying over with her lee rail dragging white water, and both anchor cables bar taut off the bow, thrumming like the strings of some monstrous instrument, and men are crawling, actually crawling, on hands and knees along the weather rail to get to the lines. The boatswain's face appears in yours an inch away, because that is the range at which human speech now works. "Glass!" he screams. "Turn your glass and then get on the pump." And this is the thing about a ship, the thing that will keep you sane tonight. Even now, even in this, someone must turn the sandglass, because time must go on being kept, because the ship is a little kingdom of order thrown into the mouth of disorder, and the kingdom holds as long as every man does his small absurd duty. So you crawl to the binnacle, and you turn the glass, and you sing out the turning, a scrap of ritual sound instantly eaten by the storm. And then you go below, to the pump, into the dark, and the dark is where you spend the battle. This is the truth of such nights that the ballads never carry. The boy's eye view of the famous storm is a black wooden cave, knee-deep in ice water that surges hip-deep with each roll, 4 bodies on the pump brakes, up, down, the clank and slosh of it, the water coming over you in slaps, the rats swimming past your legs in the dark with their little pushing noses, and above your head, through the deck transmitted into your skull by the ship's own bones, the concussions. The williwaws arriving one after another, each one a blow, the hull ringing like a struck cask, the anchor cables thrum going up and up in pitch, and every man at the pump keeping his private ear on that pitch, because every man knows what it means if it stops. At some hour of the night it stops. A report like a bombard, felt through the water itself, and the Victoria's head falls off sideways, and the motion of the whole world changes, looser, wilder, wrong, and a voice comes down the hatch with the spray cracked wide open. Cables parted, the ship is dragging, all hands, all hands. I will not pretend to you that you remember that neck stretch in order. Nobody remembers such hours in order. The memory comes back to you afterward in cards dealt from a shuffled deck. You remember the second anchor dragging, the deck under your palms shuddering as the flukes bounced and skated over the rock below. You remember the sound of surf, close, on the lee side, the white noise of water on stone that every sailor's spine knows without ever being taught, and the naked cliff appearing in the wild lantern light, not 2 ships' lengths off the lee quarter, streaming, black, patient. You remember the master and the captain. General's orders shouted ship to ship down the wind, sails set in a screaming gale on purpose, a scrap of forecourse, madness in any harbour in Spain, the only sanity here, to sail the anchor out of the ground and claw the ship off that wall by force, trading the certain death behind for the possible death ahead. You remember hauling. That is the card that comes up most. Your 2 dead hands and Domingo's beside them on the same line, and the ice on it, and the skin going and hauling anyway, and Domingo's voice next to your ear, not screaming, saying it almost conversationally, the strangest thing, saying, "Pull, Juan, pull, Juan, pull, Juan," like a heartbeat, like a mother's rhyme, and you pulled on your name every time it came. And you remember the moment the bow came up into the wind and hung there, the whole ship trembling on the point of it, the cliff roaring behind you, everything in the world balanced on whether 85 tons of bask oak could take one step forward against a falling mountain of air. And she took it. She took the step. The sail cracked full, the deck leaned into it, and the Victoria began to move, a crawl, a creep, the cliff sliding backward off the quarter a fathom at a time, and no one cheered. There was no cheering left in anyone. There was only the next order and the next line. But you felt it run through the crew all the same, hand to hand along the ropes like heat. Alive. Still alive. This ship was built on a Basque river by men like your father, and she just refused a cliff, and you are alive. Toward dawn the wind ate itself, the way williwaw storms do, collapsing all at once into gusts, then flaws, then a shocking ringing silence. And the light came up grey and small on two ships still afloat in the reach with no bottom. The Trinidad had dragged nearly onto the opposite shore and clawed off the same way. Her mainyard sprung, men aloft on it already, tiny against the ice. The Victoria had lost an anchor, her best power forever. 30 fathoms down on the ledge with a fathom of parted cable. A wound the fleet could not replace and would feel for the rest of the voyage. The foredeck was a snarl of frozen cordage. Something had taken 6 feet of the larboard rail away entire. Nobody ever found out what, and the mountains stood around the wreckage of the night absolutely unchanged, white and pink in the sunrise, their reflections reassembling on the calming water. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And you stood at the pump break where you'd been for 6 hours, too tired to let go of it, actually unable to persuade your hands to open, and you looked at that beauty over the rail and you understood the strait completely at last, in one sentence, the sentence you will carry all your life and say to no one. It was never angry. That is just what this place is like when it isn't noticing you at all. Bautista pried your fingers off the brake himself, one at a time, an old man's thumbs working at a boy's frozen knuckles with the tenderness that undid you far more than the storm had. He looked at your open palms, at the state of them, and then at your face, and he said the only thing he said to you that whole morning. Now you're a sailor. It's not worth what it costs. Then he sent you below to sleep, and you slept through a full watch and part of another, dreamless, like a stone dropped into 30 fathoms, while the men worked around your body where it lay and stepped over you without complaint, because every one of them had once been the boy asleep on the cable, and every one of them knew. You wake to good news and to a hole in the world, and it takes days to understand that the second thing has swallowed the first. The good news comes in the boat, and it comes shouting. While the big ships were fighting for their lives at anchor, the Captain General had a longboat away down the southwest arm under a picked crew, ordered to run the channel to its end, whatever the end should prove to be. 3 days out, they found it. The men in that boat came back around the point pulling like champions and yelling before anyone could possibly hear the words. And when the words finally carried, they carried like fire in dry grass, ship to ship, deck to deck, down the hatches into the dark where you are splicing frozen rope with your ruined hands. The arm does not close, the arm opens. They stood at the mouth of it and saw a cape, a high, hard headland, the last rock of the continent, and past that cape, no far shore, no walls, no ice, open water, blue-grey and enormous, swells rolling in from a horizon with nothing on it, swells with the long, deep stride that only a great ocean makes, the South Sea. The other side of the world's back door, real, found, reached. Some of the men who brought the news were crying and pretending it was spray. Pigafetta wrote that the Captain General wept again. For the second time in a month, this iron man, and named the Cape Deseado, Cape Desired, for we had been desiring it for a long time. And if there is a plainer or more human sentence in all the chronicles of discovery, you have never heard it. That is the good news. Now the whole. The rendezvous with the other two ships comes and goes. The Concepcion is there, on time, at the meeting place. The San Antonio is not. At first it is nothing. A delay, a contrary wind in her channel, a sprung spar. Ships are late. The sea makes everyone a liar about appointments. The Captain General takes the fleet back east through the reaches to search, and the search has all the machinery of hope in it. Guns fired at intervals, their echoes slamming around the mountains for half a minute at a time, smoke signals on the headlands, letters sealed in pots and buried at the foot of crosses raised on the heights, in case she passes after, telling her the course, telling her where her family has gone. You climb to one of those crosses yourself in the landing party, up through the dripping, iron-hard trees with the pot under your arm, and you dug the hole and set the letter in it like a burial, which is what it was, though nobody used the word. Day after day the southeast arm gives back nothing. No sail. No smoke that isn't the watcher's smoke. The men stop speculating out loud, which on a ship is the true sign that a thing has gone from problem to grief, because everyone knows. That is the poison of it. Nobody knows, and everyone knows. There was no wreckage in her channel, no boats, no men on the beaches waving shirts. A ship that dies leaves a stain. The San Antonio left a departure, and she left it with Esteban Gomez aboard, the pilot with the sane arithmetic and the acid grievance, and the fact that tightens every jaw in the fleet each time it surfaces. She left with her hold carrying the largest single share of the food. The best part of the fleet's remaining Biscuit, the lion's share of the salt meat, the oil, the cheese, the beans, loaded into the biggest ship for the simple, sensible reason that she had the most room, sailed for Spain, mutinied. You will learn the details only years later if you live. The loyal captain seized and put in irons, Gomes and the officers turning her east through the strait and out past the white cliffs and home across the whole ocean sea, to tell the king their version first. But even now, without the details, the fleet reads the shape of it well enough. The strait's discovery is secure, and it is sailing to Seville in a stolen ship, and the men who found it are standing at the far end of it with 3 vessels, 100 and fewer stomachs than they started with, and a fraction of the food, staring west at an ocean whose size not one living person on earth has ever measured. You hear the Captain General consulted his astrologer about the missing ship, and the astrologer told him the truth as the stars gave it, mutiny and desertion, and Magellan listened and said little. What was there to say? The council was held. The pilots gave their numbers, and the answer came back down to the crews the same as it came at the leather-eating promise. West. The fleet goes west. On the 28th of November, 1520, hold that date, it is one of the hinge dates of the entire human story, and you were there, 17 and salt-cracked and present, the Trinidad, the Concepcion, and the Victoria pass Cape Deseado, and stand out of the strait into the open South Sea. 38 days it took, end to end, to thread the maze. The guns fire a salute. The priests lead the Te Deum, and 150 ragged voices carry it out over the swells, and the great ocean takes the sound and swallows it without an echo, the way it will swallow everything else. You stand at the rail as the land lets go. The cape draws aft. The mountains of the strait, your mountains, the walls that nearly killed you, the reach where your anchor lies, the beach where you buried a letter like a body. They stack up astern, blue, then grey, then a pencil line, then gone. And ahead, nothing. The purest nothing you've ever put your eyes on. A horizon like a ruled line, 360 degrees of it, under a sky suddenly, obscenely gentle. Because that is the joke the ocean tells first, and it is a good joke, patient, with a long fuse. The weather turns kind. After the strait screaming, this sea lies down like a dog by a fire. Warm days begin, then warmer. The wind settles astern, steady as a trade, day after day after day, and the 3 ships run before it with everything set, logging their leagues, and the men peel off their rotten wrappings and turn their grey faces up to actual sunlight, and someone brings out a pipe, and the cook starts humming again, and the Captain General, standing on his high deck looking at this improbable mercy, gives the ocean the name it will carry until the end of names, Pacific, the peaceful sea. He is not wrong. That is the terrible thing. The sea is peaceful. It is peaceful the way the Straits Mountains were beautiful entirely and without the slightest reference to you. It is peaceful, and it is, though not one man aboard can know it, though every chart and cosmographer in Europe has promised otherwise, promised the Spice Islands lie a brisk few weeks past the newfound strait. It is 10,000 miles wide. 10,000 miles. The men are provisioned thinly for a crossing they imagine in weeks. The ocean in front of the bow is 1/3 of the surface of the entire planet, and it is empty, and their course through it will miss, by flukes of latitude so small they would make you weep, missing whole island chains by a day's sail over the horizon, very nearly every scrap of land in it. You don't know this yet tonight, the first night out, standing your watch under the enormous unfamiliar stars. And they are unfamiliar. You crossed the line long ago, and the sky here is a stranger's sky. No North Star, no bears. Instead, low over the stern, 2 little clouds of light that never move, glowing patches of powdered star that Pigafetta sketches and the men navigate by, clouds that will one day carry the Captain General's own name across every atlas printed. You don't know what the width of this ocean is going to do to you, but your body, I think, suspects. Because you find yourself doing the boys' arithmetic again in the dark, the count you swore off in the strait, casks of biscuit dust, casks of meat, minus the San Antonio, divided by 150 mouths, divided by days, and the numbers will not resolve. They slide away from you like the lead line finding no bottom, and you turn your glass and sing out the hour and put the numbers away where you put the cliff and the parted cable and the man who died 8 feet from you at San Julian. The hold is where you feel the truth first. It is your work to go down there, into the dark under the waterline, and week by week you feel the ship change under your bare feet. A full ship is quiet below. The cargo packs her like a nut. This ship is beginning to boom. Empty casks ring hollow when the swell shifts them. The tiers are gapped. The rats. And here is a detail I want you to keep because it says everything about what is coming. The rats are getting harder to catch because the rats have started running out of ship's food too. And a hungry rat is a clever rat, and the price of one has gone from half a ducat toward a full one, and there are men, sensible grown men, hidalgos among them, on the waiting list. Christmas comes somewhere in the emptiness. The priests say the mass on the rolling deck, and the men sing, and the sun goes down into an ocean that has shown them nothing. Not a rock, not a gull, for weeks. And you think about your mother's kitchen in Baracaldo, the iron pot, chestnuts in the fire, rain on the green hills, and you catch Domingo thinking his own version of the same thing beside you, and neither of you says a word because there are things you can survive only by not saying them. The new year turns, 1521, born in the middle of nowhere at all. The biscuit ration drops again. Then the thing that is not biscuit but is called biscuit drops again, and the peaceful sea rolls on ahead of the bow, blue and warm and endless and smiling, and somewhere in those weeks every man aboard comes privately to the same understanding you came to at the pump break in the strait. The understanding that is the real cargo of this whole voyage. The world is not the size they told you. Nothing is the size they told you. And nobody is coming. Let me slow down now and take you through what the great emptiness actually does to a ship of men, hour by hour and mouthful by mouthful, because this is the part the schoolbooks skip. The schoolbooks give you the map with the brave dotted line across the blue. They do not give you the smell. Start with the food, because everything starts with the food. The biscuit is gone. The real biscuit. The last recognizable pieces of it, eaten weeks ago. What remains in the breadroom is what Picafetta, sitting in his leaking cabin with his ink going gluey in the heat, describes with an honesty that still stops the breath 5 centuries later. A powder of biscuit swarming with worms, the good of it eaten out by the rats stinking strongly of their urine. That is your bread now. It is issued by weight, a fistful at a time, and you eat it. Hear me. You eat it gratefully, cupped in your palm so the wind takes none, licking the last of the grey dust off the cracks in your skin. And the taste is exactly what he says it is, and your body has stopped objecting, because your body has moved past taste into accounting. The water has turned. Somewhere in the 3rd or 4th week the casks went over some invisible edge, and now the water is yellow and it smells. Picafetta again, the faithful witness. It is putrid and yellow, and you drink it in careful sips with your nose shut in your fingers, and you have learned the trick every man aboard has learned. Drink at dusk, when you can't see it, and then the leather. I told you to file the Captain General's promise away, the one that went through the fleet like a curse. We will eat the leather off the yard, and I told you that you filed it as an exaggeration. Take it out of the file now. On the main yard and on the rigging where chafing gear is fitted, the running lines are wrapped in ox hide to save the ropes from wearing. That hide has been baking in sun and salt for over a year. It is the hardness of the ship's own timber, and the men climb up, on order, and cut it down. And this is what you do with it. This is the actual recipe. Remember it next time someone calls history boring. You tow the strips of leather behind the ship on a line. 4 days, 5, until the sea has softened them to something like sodden bark. Then you haul them in, and lay them on the embers of the cook's fire until they scorch and swell. And then you gnaw. You hold the hot strip in both hands, this thing that was a fitting on the rigging, and you work at it with your side teeth like a dog with a strap, and your jaws ache all night after, a deep hinge ache in front of your ears, and men sit in rows along the deck at sundown gnawing their leather in silence with their eyes closed, and no one laughs, and no one has laughed for a long time now. Sawdust. They eat sawdust, soaked, to bulk out the powder that was bread. And the rats, of course, the lucky ones eat the rats while the rats last. And you, the boy who could hunt the ballast in the dark, you are rich for a while by the ship's new arithmetic. Half a ducat, and you find, and this is the thing about yourself you will carry longest, You find you mostly give them away, not nobly. Don't let me make you noble. You are 17 and starving. You give them away because you have discovered you cannot chew meat while Domingo watches you with his new face. Everyone has a new face now. The flesh has drawn down tight to the bone all over the ship. Cheekbones and eye sockets coming forward month by month like rocks at low tide, and men you have known for a year and a half approach you on deck, and for half a heartbeat you cannot name them. And then the sickness comes, and the sickness is worse than the hunger, because the hunger at least is honest. It starts in the mouth, the gums. They swell, first at the back around the big teeth, and they turn a colour gums should never be, a dark shining purple-grey, and then they keep swelling up and over the teeth themselves, until in the worst men the teeth stand in pockets of proud spongy flesh, and the man cannot close his jaws, cannot chew even the leather, cannot eat at all, and so starves in the middle of his shipmates with food, such as it is, in his very hand. The breath of a man in that state is a thing you will never find words for, and you will never need to, because your body will remember it for you, forever, without your permission. Old wounds open. That is the uncanny part, the part that makes the men whisper about curses. Scars years healed, a knife cut from a tavern in another life, a rope burn from the first month at sea. They unseal themselves, redden, and weep, as if time itself were running backward inside the body. Legs blotch and swell. The strength goes out of men like water out of a cracked jug, not dramatically, just steadily. A man at the halyard finding one morning that his arms will not take his own weight, and looking at his hands in mild confusion, and sitting down where he stood. Scurvy. The word exists, the cure does not. Or rather, and this is the sentence that should keep princes awake at night, the cure is lying in barrels in the hold. The quince preserve, the marmalade, kept aft for the officers' table, and the little stores of it the gentlemen hold, the fruit sugar, the very thing the dying men's bodies are screaming for, and nobody on earth knows that this is what it is. The officers stay strangely healthier, and everyone can see it, and no one can explain it, and men mutter about God's favour and gentle blood, and the answer is sitting in the marmalade, and it will take the doctors another 250 years to find it, and in the meantime this disease will kill more sailors than every storm, every battle, and every wreck combined, more than the sea itself, killed by an absence, by a missing spoonful. 19 men die on the crossing. You want them to die in a scene, in a storm with meaning around them. They die on quiet mornings. That is what the peaceful sea gives them. Perfect weather to die in, one at a time, over weeks, and each time the fleet does the whole of what it can do, which is this: the body sewn into its own sleeping canvas by the sailmaker, who takes, by the oldest custom of the sea, the last stitch through the nose to be sure, a round shot at the feet, the words from the priest, the same words each time, shortening slightly each time as the priest himself weakens, the plank tipped at the rail, the small white splash, and the 2 giants from Patagonia, the shackled ones, the ones taken for the king. They die too in this stretch, of the heat and the food and the sorrow, far from their cold open country, and one of them, Pigafetta tells it, asked in his last days for the cross and kissed it, and they gave him a Christian name as he died, Paul, and you helped carry him to the rail, and he was so light by then, this man who had once stood like a tower over your whole crew, he was so light, and the splash he made was the same small splash as everyone's, and the peaceful sea closed over it and glittered on, and you went and turned the sand glass because it was your watch, and the hour must be sung. I want to give you the sound of the crossing too before we leave it, because the emptiness had a sound, and the sound did its own slow work on the men. It was not silence. A ship under way is incapable of silence. It was worse. It was repetition. The same 7 or 8 sounds around the clock for 100 days. The bow waves hiss, the rudders knock in its gudgeons, the yards creak on the roll, the halyards tap, tap, tap against the masts, the sand in the glass. You would swear you could hear it. By the end, you could not, and you could hear it. The pump's morning clank, the bell, no landbird, no surf, no voice that wasn't a voice you'd heard 10,000 times. Men began, in the 7th and 8th weeks, to hear things inside the repetition, bells from churches that were 9,000 miles away, their mothers, dogs barking, and the wise ones said so out loud at once, in daylight, to the mess, and were laughed at, and laughed too, and were cured, mostly because a haunting shared is a haunting halved. The ones who kept their bells to themselves did worse. There was a Sicilian on the Concepcion who stopped speaking entirely somewhere in the middle passage. A good worker, worked till the end, never spoke again in anyone's hearing. The men left him be and covered his silences at muster, and he came all the way around the world inside that quiet, and what he heard in it he took ashore with him and away, and I have always hoped it was something kind. And the boredom, I should say this plainly because no one ever does. Enormous stretches of the most extraordinary voyage in human history were crushingly, mind-flatteningly boring, and the boredom was dangerous, and the officers knew it, and fought it with work the way you bail a leak. Sails were shifted that did not strictly need shifting. Every inch of running rigging was re-rove. The boys were set to making spun yarn by the mile, teasing old rope apart and rolling it askew against the thigh, until the skin of your right leg wore smooth and shiny as a saddle, a mark you carry yet. The gunner exercised his crews on empty ocean, the concussions rolling away flat over the swells with nothing anywhere to echo them, the loneliest sound you ever heard a weapon make. Pigafetta ran his classes. He had taken to teaching, of all things, on the quiet afternoons, words of the Patagonian giants, words of the new islands to come which Enrique fed him, letters for the boys who wanted them, and you wanted them, and that is where and when and from whom Juan de Subleta learned to read, sitting on a hatch cover in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with his finger under the word 17 starving, sounding out the names of spices. The fishing saved lives when there was fishing. Flying fish came aboard on their own some nights, gifts out the dark thumping on the deck like applause, and the watch scrambled for them on hands and knees. Bonito and Dorado ran under the shadow of the hull for days at a stretch, and the men rigged hooks and grains and took them when God allowed, and a fish day changed the whole temper of the ship, men singing at the halyards over a few pounds of shared flesh, the ancient arithmetic of the tribe. Food today, therefore we are a people, and shark. You ate shark that would have gagged a Seville dog, and the liver of it, oily and vile, and I will tell you something the physicians would take 3 centuries to catch up to. The men who forced down that liver held off the worst of the sickness a little longer than the men who wouldn't, and nobody knew why. And the why was sitting in the liver all along, the same secret as the marmalade, wearing a different coat. There is one more piece of the crossing I have kept back, and I give it to you now, in the quiet before the landfall, because it belongs here, the navigation, the pure impossible fact of it. Think about what these men were actually doing in their bodies with their tools. No chart. There could be no chart. They were the pencil. No way to measure longitude at all. The instrument that will solve that problem is 2.5 centuries unborn. What they had was this: a compass whose needle, out here, had begun to wander from true in ways that frightened the pilots, and which the Captain General quietly corrected by the stars each night. An astrolaban quadrant for the sun's height at noon, a brass ring swinging on a heaving deck, red squinting giving latitude to within a smudge, a sand glass turned by a boy, turned by you, whose faithfulness was the ship's entire grip on time, and the log of the ship's speed taken by eye, by feel, by an old man watching foam go past and pronouncing a number out of 40 years of watching foam. That was the whole apparatus. Dead reckoning, they call it, and never has a name been more honestly earned. Reckoning in the presence of death, with the dead's own patience. Each noon the pilots of the 3 ships compared their guesses, and the guesses drifted apart day by day like the ships of a scattered fleet. Leagues, then tens of leagues, and each pilot kept his own count and his own counsel, and the sum of all of it, hear this, the sum of all of it was that these starving men, with a boy's hourglass and a swinging ring of brass, crossed the largest object on the planet and made their landfall. And when at last the survivors carried their reckoning all the way home around the world, they discovered they had lost a day. A whole day missing from their careful count, though the count had never once been broken. Thursday aboard when it was Friday ashore. And the pilots checked their books in something close to terror, and the books were perfect. And slowly, the learned men worked out the truth, which is that the day was not lost but spent, paid out in slivers, watch by watch, sunset by sunset, all the way around the turning earth, the first day ever spent that way since the world began. You were one of the men who spent it. Your account, boy of the sandglass, was part of the proof. There are doctors of Salamanca who will argue about what you demonstrated for 100 years. You kept the count of the dead in notches privately, on the inside of a knee of the hull down by your sleeping place, where the lantern light never reached. A boy's ledger, one small cut per canvas splash. And you told yourself you did it so that someone was counting, so that the number would exist somewhere outside the priest's book, and that was true. And also you did it for the older reason, the one under all ledgers, because a mark made is a fear moved out of the body and into the wood. 19 notches by the crossing's end. You put your thumbnail in each one some nights in the dark, name by name, the way your mother went along her beads, and if anyone tells you those a different act, they have not been to sea. 98 days the crossing lasts. 3 months and a week, out of sight of everything, and in all of it, in an ocean strewn, had they only known, with 10,000 islands. The fleet raises land exactly twice, and both times it is a waterless, uninhabited scrap of scrub and sharks where nothing can be had, and the men name them the Unfortunate Islands, which is sailor humour, which is the blackest and most necessary substance ever mined, and sail on. And you're luckier than most, and you know it and you don't know why, and that too is a weight. Your gums bleed. Your teeth stand loose enough in their sockets that you have stopped testing them with your tongue, because the information is unbearable. But you can still climb, still haul, still chew, and some nights the Greeks bitter scurvy grass from the strait. The wad of it you hoarded rat-style in a twist of cloth. Some nights you press a pinch of it on Domingo, whose legs have started to blotch, and stand over him while he chews it and grimaces, and whether it does his body any good, no physician alive could tell you. But he chews it because you stand there, and you stand there because he once said your name 300 times on a rope in a storm. And this, listen, because this is the actual secret of how anyone survives the impossible. There's the entire machinery of it. Not courage, not faith, though there is faith. Just men in pairs and threes, holding each other upright with small stubborn acts, one watch at a time, under the two little clouds of stars, while the most beautiful weather in the world carries them across the largest thing on the planet at the speed of a man walking. Some nights on the middle watch, when the ship steers herself before the endless kind wind, and there is nothing to do but keep the glass and watch the phosphorescence peel away from the bow in green fire, you are, God forgive you, almost at peace, starving, salt-cracked, 10,000 miles from your mother, surrounded by dying men on a dead ocean, and the sea burns green under the bow, and the stranger stars turn overhead in perfect order, and the ship creaks her long wooden sentence over and over, and you catch yourself thinking the thought that has no business surviving in a mouthful of loose teeth. I am seeing it. Whatever else is true, no one in the history of the world has seen this before, and I am seeing it. Bautista finds you like that once at the glass, staring out at the green fire, and he stands beside you a while, an old walnut of a man whom the scurvy is beginning to bend, and he doesn't tell you to mind your work, and he doesn't say it isn't worth what it costs, not this time. He looks out at the burning water for the space of 3 or 4 of your heartbeats, and then he says quietly, in the voice men use in churches and in holds, "Nobody will believe us, boy, not one word of it." And he is right, and he is wrong, because on the 6th of March, 1521, day 99, the masthead screams the scream you had stopped believing in, and the whole dying ship comes up the ladders like the resurrection itself, men who could not stand yesterday standing today, hauled up by their fellows, held at the rail so their eyes can drink it, and there on the horizon, green, green, the colour your eyes had forgotten was real, an island, high land, palms, smoke of cooking fires, and then flecks moving on the water, coming out fast, dozens of them, canoes with sails like birds' wings, sails of woven matting, boats that fly, crewed by tall, strong, healthy people whose existence proves in one glance that the world out here is not empty at all, was never empty, that the emptiness was hardly ever the size of your own map. The islands of the Latin sails. Guam, the charts will say one day. What happens there? The swarming aboard, the taking of the skiff, the misunderstanding of 2 people who each have ancient clear rules about property that the other cannot see, the Captain General's ugly reprisal on the shore, the fresh food carried off, coconuts and rice and water like liquid glass. That is a whole story of its own and not a clean one, and I will not varnish it, and I will not tell it tonight. Tonight, I only need you to feel the one thing your body felt, the thing that overrode everything, fresh water going down your cracked throat, and the milk of a green coconut after 99 days, sweet and alive, and Domingo beside you at the rail drinking his share with tears cutting white channels through the salt grime of his face, openly unashamed, and half the crew the same, a shipload of skeletons weeping over fruit. And I owe you the honest length of that first landfall, because the relief of it was not simple, and this channel has never traded in simple relief. The island rose all morning off the bow, and by noon the canoes were around the ships in dozens. Proas, the fastest craft any man aboard had ever seen or would ever see. Hulls like knife blades with a slim outrigger riding the water alongside, lateen sails of golden matting, and they did not sail so much as skim, carving circles around your wallowing, weed-bearded, dying ships the way swifts carve circles around a plough horse, and the men of the fleet, even now, even starving, hung on the rails in pure professional awe, because a sailor is a sailor before he is anything else, and every soul aboard could see at a glance that these were the finest small boat seamen on the face of the earth, and the people came aboard. That was the wonder, and that was the wreck of it. They came up the sides, laughing, strong, glowing with health. Health, the thing itself, walking around on your deck of skeletons like an insult and an advertisement. And they were delighted with everything, and they took things freely, openly, without a trace of stealth. Whatever was loose, whatever was bright. And finally the skiff itself, the boat towing astern, unbent and away before anyone understood. And here is what you came to understand only years later, chewing on it. There was no theft on that deck, not as they knew the word. You had sailed into a world with different rules about things, a world, some say, where what arrives on your water is shared by the sea's own law. And the fleet had arrived out of a world that hangs men for a stolen cloak. And the two laws met on the Trinidad's deck without an interpreter, because there is no interpreter for that. And what followed followed. The crossbows. The reprisal ashore, huts burning and men dying over a boat. The Captain General's ledger balanced by his own lights, and the fleet watering and loading at last. Rice, yams, coconuts by the hundred, water, fruit. The sick lifted up on deck, begging with signs for the entrails of the freshly killed, and being given them, and eating and living. Life and wrong braided so tight in a single anchorage that you cannot pull one strand without the other, and I told you I would not varnish it, and I haven't, and now set it down beside everything else this voyage carries, because that is where it belongs, and where it has always been carried, in the same hold. The fleet waters, feeds, and stands on west. Days later it raises the islands the Captain General names for St. Lazarus, the islands that will one day be called the Philippines, and there, in a bay called Homonhon, comes the hour I want to leave you with before we start down towards sleep. Because it is quiet, and history is almost never quiet, and this once it is. A boat comes out to the anchored ships. Not a war canoe, not a swarm, a single boat, 9 men in it, and they come alongside carefully. And there is that long suspended minute that you have learned to dread on this voyage. The minute where two worlds look at each other over a strip of water and decide what kind of story this is going to be. And the Captain General orders that no man move or speak, and gifts are handed down, red caps, mirrors, ivory combs, bells, the small bright currency of first meetings. And the men in the boat consider these things and confer and hand up in return fish and a jar of palm wine and bananas and 2 coconuts, and make signs, easy to read as print, that they have more, that they will come back, that this is the beginning of something and not the end of anything. And then, this is the moment. One of them notices the sick. The worst of the scurvy men have been carried up and laid on deck for the air under an awning, and they are terrible to see, and the man in the boat sees them, and he does not recoil. He points and asks something with his face, and the interpreter's slave Enrique, the Captain General's own man, taken from these very seas years ago by a younger Magellan, carried to Portugal and Spain and around half the earth, and who in these islands has begun, with a look on his face that you will never forget, to understand the local speech, which means, though nobody on the ships has done the sum aloud yet, that this slave, this man everyone stepped past for 2 years, is the first human being in the history of the world to come all the way around it. Enrica speaks haltingly, and the men in the boat nod as if a simple thing has been settled. They come back in days with their boats low in the water. Coconuts, oranges, palm wine, a rooster crowing indignantly in the bilge, and the sick men are given the fruit first by the Captain General's order. He visits them himself daily, this hard little limping man, and gives them the coconut milk with his own hands. And you watch, over the following week, a thing that no physician in Europe could have shown you. You watch men come back from the dead on fruit. Gums shrinking, eyes clearing, a man who was sewn halfway into his own imagination sitting up and complaining about the wine, and the complaint running down the deck like music. Because a complaining sailor is a living sailor, everyone knows that. You stand at the rail on one of those evenings in air like warm milk, land smell rolling off the green island, earth, smoke, flowers, rot, life, the smell of soil after 2 years of salt. And Domingo comes and stands beside you, chewing an orange down to the bitter skin, and the 2 little clouds of stars are climbing astern over the wake that stretches, if you let your mind run down it, back and back, across the peaceful murderous ocean, through the black maze of the strait, past the beach where a nobleman stands marooned forever, past San Julian and the giants and the green dream of Brazil, across the ocean sea to a river in Seville, and the smell of orange peel and tar. 2 years, 10,000 leagues. You went into that wake a shipwright's boy, and something else entirely is standing here in your skin, something with tree bark hands and loose teeth and a clicking shoulder, and knowledge in it that no university in Christendom holds. You know how big the world is. Almost no one alive knows that. You know. We should sleep, Domingo says. He says it every night now, since the fruit came, like a man rehearsing a luxury. In a minute, you say, and I'm going to leave you both there, at the rail, in the warm dark. I am not going to take you the rest of the way tonight. Not to Cebu, and the mass baptisms, and the politics that closed over the fleet like channel water. Not to the island of Mactan, where in a month's time, in the shallows at dawn, the Captain General will make the one miscalculation the strait in the ocean could not force out of him, and wade in where a wiser and smaller man would not, and be cut down in the surf while his boats look on, refusing to fall, Pigafetta says, turning again and again to see that his men got away, so that the last thing Ferno-de-Magellan ever did was count other people to safety, not to the long broken retreat, ships burned for want of crews, the Concepcion's ashes on a beach, and not to the end of the ending 18 months from your orange-scented evening, when a single worm-eaten ship, yours, the Victoria, the Basque barrel that refused a cliff, crawls up the river to Seville with 18 men aboard out of the 237 who left. 18 scarecrows who go barefoot in their shirts, candles in their fists, to the shrine of Santa Maria de la Victoria to keep the vow of the drowning, having sailed for the first time in the existence of the human species around the entire world. Elcano at their head, Pigafetta among them, his book pressed to his chest, and a boy from Baracaldo, 19 now, whose name sits quietly in the crew list to this day, in the archive in Seville, ink on paper, Juan de Zubeleta, Grumet, one of the 18, the youngest of them. All of that is coming. But it is not tonight. Tonight the fleet lies at anchor off a green island, and the sick are healing, and the palm wine is going round, and nobody on any of the 3 ships knows the future, which is the one mercy the sea grants absolutely everyone, always, without exception. So stay at the rail a while, feel the ship under you. She's never still, even at anchor, a long, slow breathing roll. The mother motion your body has taken so deep that on land, when land finally comes, the ground itself will seem to heave for weeks. Listen to her talk. A ship at night is all small sounds, the tick of the anchor cable taking up, the creak of the yards in their slings, water clucking along the strakes, the helm relieved, someone's cough, the rigging's low Aeolian note, so much gentler here than the mad scream of the strait, just a breath across the shrouds, the ship humming to herself. The watch is set. The glass is turned. Some other boy's work tonight, some newer boy, and you feel the strangeness of that. The watch going on without you, the way it went on before you, and will go on after, hourglass to hourglass, hand to hand, 400 years of sand until the sand becomes bells and the bells become numbers on a screen on a bridge, and still somewhere tonight, on dark water on the far side of your window, a young sailor is standing a middle watch and keeping the hours and thinking of home. Some things don't change. Go below now. Down the ladder you could climb blind. You do climb it blind. Into the warm fug of the 'tween decks, the smell you no longer smell, tar, bilge, wet wool, sleep. Your place is where it always is, between Domingo and the great coiled cable, and the cable has held your shape for 2 years, and you fit yourself into it, bone by tired bone. The shoulder ticks once, twice, and settles. Your hands. Look at them one last time in the dark. You can read them like Bautista reads water. The rope scars, the shell cuts, the palms gone to bark. They have hauled you around the planet, these hands. They have earned the stillness. Let them be still. The island air comes down the hatch, green and heavy. Somewhere ashore a night bird is calling. 2 notes, patient, over and over. Domingo is already gone, breathing slow, his back warm against yours. Alive, alive. The hull breathes, the cable ticks, the water clucks its one soft syllable along the planking, an inch from your ear, all night, every night, the whole sea speaking to you through an inch of Basque oak. You are warm enough, fed enough, truly fed, for the first time in 100 days. Safe enough for tonight, and tonight is the only sea a sleeper has to cross. Let the wake unspool behind you in the dark. Let the strait's black mountains sink below your horizon. Let the great ocean smooth itself out, league after league after league, until it is only the rocking of the ship, only the breathing of the boy beside you, only the slow tilt of the stranger stars. Centuries will pass. The Victoria's timbers will go to dust and her name to bronze. This strait will fill with steamships, then with silence again when the canal is cut through Panama and the world's traffic abandons the old cold door. The blank spaces on the maps will fill in, everyone, until children spin the whole finished globe under one finger in a classroom and never once feel the size of it. But the size is still there. The water is still there, still 10,000 miles of it, still deeper than any line, and people will still go out on it, and still stand night watches, and still come home changed or not come home, and still, at the end of the long day, lie down in narrow beds while the world rocks them, wondering what tomorrow will bring. The human heart doesn't change. The need for rest at the end of a long voyage, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way the tide took the ships past Cape Desired, without effort, without asking. Let the noise quiet. Let the watch keep itself. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've crossed enough water for one life. You've earned this rest. Take it. And dream of green islands. Good night.